I think the first key issue or mistake that Buhari made upon, I guess, contesting the presidential ballot in 2015 was stating that he was going to essentially nullify the Boko Haram insurgency, which he painted as being a very Nigeria-centric phenomenon. If we actually trace the Boko Haram insurgency, at least the group's areas of operation, we see Yobe, Borno, and Adamawa states is the group's key operational zone, but it also extends across the wider Lake Chad Basin, specifically into the Difa region of Niger, the far north region of Cameroon, and also the Lak region of Chad. So essentially, it's very difficult for Nigeria to tackle an insurgency of regional proportions. Now, what we saw, for example, prior to 2014 was the minute Nigeria launched intensified counterterrorism operations in northeastern Nigeria, militants would simply cross over the border into neighboring countries, wait until those counterterrorism operations lost momentum, and then simply just cross back into Nigerian territory and relaunch the insurgency. What we did see with President Buhari in the first few months of his presidential tenure was to reach out to neighboring countries, the governments of Cameroon, Niger, and Chad, and formalize a regional counterterrorism initiative. And this proved successful. It saw a lot of territory that Boko Haram had seized in northeastern Nigeria. Some claim the size of the state of Belgium being recaptured, and slowly but surely civilian populations being resettled. But it appeared that as time went on and the threat of the violence grew a little bit smaller, cooperation between Nigeria and neighboring states fell apart. And this gave Boko Haram the opportunity to essentially recalibrate and rejuvenate its insurgency, not only in Nigeria, but in the wider region. And it's very interesting with the run into this election, because actually on election day, and we've seen in the past 24 hours the same conditions, is that there seems to have been another memorandum of understanding being brokered between President Buhari and President Idris Deby of Chad, which is seeing Chadian forces again putting pressure on Boko Haram's rear bases outside the Lake Chad region. And I think that if there is going to be an initiative to formalize collaboration in terms of counterterrorism initiatives, and Boko Haram is essentially going to be forced to face a multi-front counteroffensive, that we could see some solid gains being made against the group. But I do think that the relations between Nigeria and neighboring states is something that needs to almost be weathered and reinforced on a continued basis. What President Buhari's tenure has also seen outside of the Northeast, Boko Haram obviously captured the minds and the focus of the international community, specifically with the gratuitous violence we saw in the Northeast, but also the Chibok kidnapping. But what we lost focus of was kind of this, simmering conflict in the North Central, the Middle Belt area of the country, if we take it over the entire geographical region. And this is essentially a conflict between pastoralists, cattle-rearing communities, and those of sedentary farmers. And it also just happens that the one group, specifically the nomadic herdsmen, are firstly predominantly Muslim, and they also stem from the ethnic group of President Buhari. The farmers are predominantly Christian, and therefore the conflict in itself has just kind of really exposed the cleavages which separates Nigeria's communities per se. And what the conflict's essentially driven on is land usage. The fact that we've seen climate change affect Nigeria specifically has pushed nomadic herdsmen down into farming areas where there is grazing land for their cattle. Obviously, the farmers are very unhappy about this. And then we've seen these outbreaks of communal violence, which in 2017 and 2018 has accounted for more deaths than the Boko Haram insurgency itself. And that really emphasizes the trajectory of the crisis and where it's heading. The key concern is that there are claims of government apathy. towards the crisis, or even the fact that President Buhari, because it's his kinsmen that's been stated as being the aggressors in the conflict, that he is almost tacitly endorsing their actions. And this obviously creates problems that stems beyond what we're seeing in the Middle Belt. And because of this lack of security in the region and the fact that there's this perception that the government is not acting as they should have, both communities are essentially militarizing themselves. And this is just intensifying this cycle of violence. And then we can move to the northwest of the country, and specifically to areas such as Kaduna and Zamfara. And over there, we're also seeing an increasingly deadly cycle of violence. And this has been linked to cattle rustling, armed banditry. But in the recent weeks, it's just escalated to a scale that's almost unprecedented for the region. And it's also expanding from areas such as Zamfara into Kaduna, as I mentioned, and even as far northwest as Sokoto. There have been suggestions in security circles within Nigeria that this could have somehow linked to the Boko Haram insurgency, or that the same dynamics are at play. I haven't seen enough evidence to reinforce this. But again, we have a situation where the monopoly of violence has been taken out of state hands and placed into individual groups, and it's just creating significant amounts of insecurity. And the big concern with the northwest and the north central regions is that this is prime agricultural zones in Nigeria. Agriculture is one of the sectors which is the biggest employers of Nigerian labor. And it's also one of the sectors that the Buhari administration has identified to essentially shift away from the focus and the dependence on the hydrocarbon sector, and to just kind of diversify the economy, beyond the industry. And I guess the key concern is that we won't see that economic diversification, but we'll also see potential, job losses as a result of the violence, but also a fact that, the violence within this traditional farming areas could have an impact on food security in Nigeria.